They didn't just steal money, they stole history. From billion-dollar diamond vaults to unstoppable train robberies, these criminals weren't thugs, they were masterminds. Men and women who planned every detail with military precision, waited months or years for the perfect moment, and disappeared like ghosts. In the shadows of the underworld, they became legends, masterminds of deception, betrayal, and brilliance. Some called them geniuses, others monsters. But one thing is certain, every heist they pulled off changed the world of crime forever. This isn't fiction. It's the real story of how the boldest criminals on earth outsmarted governments, banks, and entire security systems. From the tunnels under London to the diamond vaults of Antwerp, and even the digital heists of the modern age, this is where intelligence meets danger. Join us as we uncover the world's most daring heists, the perfect crimes that shook nations, built empires, and revealed how far the human mind can go when tempted by the ultimate score. The idea of the perfect heist didn't appear overnight. It was born out of chaos, poverty, and greed, when ordinary criminals began thinking like strategists. After World War II, economies were fragile, but black markets were thriving. Former soldiers, smugglers, and gangsters realized something. While governments rebuilt nations, they could rebuild fortunes by taking what others protected. This was the dawn of organized heist crews. No longer random thieves, they were planners, technicians, and actors who could outwit entire security systems. The underworld began to evolve. In the 1950s, the United States saw one of its first major organized robberies, the Brinks job in Boston. 11 men, led by Joseph Big Joe McGinnis, studied the Brinks armored car depot for over 2 years. They mapped every guard's routine, duplicated vault keys, and rehearsed every step like a military drill. On a cold January night in 1950, they struck. Wearing Halloween masks and navy coats, they entered silently, tied up employees, and stole $2.7 million, the largest cash theft in U.S. history at the time. The entire operation took just 30 minutes, no shots fired, no alarms triggered. The press called it the crime of the century, but this was just the beginning. In Europe, another breed of thief was emerging, the gentleman robber. Men who dressed in suits, carried no weapons, and executed robberies with sophistication instead of violence. They charmed guards, blended with elites, and slipped into vaults without leaving a fingerprint. In France and Italy, they were adored by the public, seen as rebels who outsmarted the rich. One of the most infamous was Albert Spaghiari, a man who pulled off the heist of the century in 1976 by tunneling into a bank in Nice, France. His crew spent months digging underground, bypassing alarms, and emptying over 100 safety deposit boxes. When police finally found the scene, they discovered a message on the vault wall: without weapons, hatred, or violence. The legend of the heist was no longer just about money. It was about style, strategy, and message. What made these early heists remarkable wasn't the technology. It was the psychology. Each team relied on precision, discipline, and absolute trust. One weak link could destroy everything. In the criminal world, loyalty was currency, and betrayal was death. By the 1960s, heists became an international business. The mafia, cartels, and underworld networks realized the potential of organized robbery. A single successful job could fund entire criminal empires, from arms trafficking to political influence. These weren't random acts of greed anymore. They were operations, structured, rehearsed, and financed like covert missions. The rise of technology in the 1970s and 1980s changed everything. Alarm systems, security cameras, motion detectors, all designed to make theft impossible. Yet with every innovation came a smarter criminal. The same men who once studied blueprints now learned to hack locks, disable sensors, and manipulate insiders. The world had entered a new era of strategic crime. The heist was no longer a crime of chance. It became a science of control. Every second was calculated, every route rehearsed, and every mistake anticipated. The underworld had learned one powerful truth. Brute force could open a door, but intelligence could open any vault. The birth of the modern heist marked the beginning of a criminal evolution, a battle of wits between genius and justice that would only grow more dangerous with time. Antwerp, Belgium, a quiet city with one of the most secure vaults on Earth. Beneath the Diamond Center, protected by 10 layers of advanced security, lay millions of dollars worth of the world's purest diamonds. For most, the vault was untouchable. But for Leonardo Notarbartolo, it was the ultimate challenge. Leonardo wasn't an ordinary thief. He was a professional, a career criminal from Turin, Italy, with a reputation for being calm, charming, and impossibly clever. For over 2 years, he lived a double life as a diamond dealer, blending perfectly among the city's elite traders. He rented an office in the same building, learned the schedules, the routines, the codes, and the weaknesses. Every coffee break, every guard shift, every electrical flicker became part of his study. He wasn't just planning a robbery, he was preparing a masterpiece. His crew was no less brilliant. Each man specialized in a single task: alarm systems, locks, electronics, and surveillance. Together, they called themselves the School of Turin, a group that treated crime like an art form. Their plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. They would infiltrate the Diamond Center vault, bypass every alarm, and walk out without a trace. The vault was a fortress. It had infrared motion detectors, magnetic locks, heat sensors, and even seismic alarms that could detect footsteps. Any normal thief would have seen an impossible wall, but Notarbartolo saw patterns. And patterns could be broken. Over months, they built an exact replica of the vault in Italy, practicing until every move was perfect. They tested tools, light reflections, and even their timing under stress. On February 15, 2003, the night of the heist, the city was calm. Inside the Diamond Center, all seemed normal. Leonardo and his crew moved like ghosts. They had already disabled the external cameras days before. They used aluminum to block infrared sensors, plastic to prevent magnetic contacts from triggering, and a homemade device to override the lock's magnetic pulse. Every step was silent, every breath controlled. When they finally opened the vault, what they saw stunned them. Bags filled with gold, cash, and diamonds beyond imagination. It was over $100 million worth of treasure. The team spent hours emptying safety deposit boxes, carefully avoiding unnecessary mess. They didn't smash or destroy. They selected. They were professionals, and professionals always stayed calm. By morning, they were gone. No alarms had sounded. No one even knew until the next day that one of the greatest heists in human history had just taken place. The Antwerp police were humiliated. The vault had been advertised as unbreakable, protected by the best technology money could buy. Yet a handful of men had outsmarted it completely. For weeks, the world was in awe. Interpol called it the perfect crime. News agencies labeled it the work of criminal geniuses. But perfection never lasts. Leonardo's downfall began with something as small as a plastic bag. A few days after the heist, police found a garbage bag near the crime scene filled with sandwich wrappers, half-eaten food, and torn pieces of jewelry envelopes. A simple DNA test linked it back to Notarbartolo. He was arrested in Italy and sentenced to 10 years in prison, but the diamonds were never found. Most of the crew vanished. The vault was rebuilt, the security tightened, and Antwerp learned a painful lesson. Even the most advanced systems cannot stop a patient mind. The diamond heist of 2003 remains one of the most daring, complex, and intelligent robberies in history. It wasn't fueled by violence or chaos. it was driven by brilliance. For Leonardo Notarbartolo, it wasn't about money. It was about proving that nothing, no matter how secure, is truly untouchable. England, 1963. A warm August night that would go down as one of the most audacious crimes in British history. A Royal Mail train was moving quietly through the countryside, carrying more than 120 mail bags packed with cash from Glasgow to London. It seemed like an ordinary journey, guarded only by a few unarmed staff. But on that night, a crew of 15 men, led by Bruce Reynolds, changed history with what would later be called the Great Train Robbery. The plan was bold, simple, and brilliantly executed. The crew tampered with a railway signal light near Ledburn, switching the green light to red. When the driver stopped, thinking there was a malfunction, the gang ambushed the train. They cut phone lines, took control of the engine, and detached the carriages containing the money. Every man had a job, from lookout to muscle to driver. They had trained for months, studying the train schedule, the terrain, and even rehearsing how fast they could unload the loot. When the heist began, not a single bullet was fired. They overpowered the driver, moved the train a short distance to a pre-chosen bridge, and began transferring the bags into waiting trucks. The atmosphere was tense, but methodical. It took them only 30 minutes to load over 2.6 million pounds, equivalent to more than $60 million today. Not a single alarm went off. The countryside remained silent, unaware that one of the most famous robberies in history was unfolding in the dark. Once they escaped, the gang hid in a remote farmhouse called Leather Slade Farm, where they planned to lay low until the media attention faded. For days, they stayed inside, counting the money and waiting for instructions, but human error would once again bring down genius. They left behind fingerprints on a Monopoly board they used to pass the time. When the police raided the farm, they matched the prints to known criminals, and within weeks, the manhunt began. The trial that followed was one of Britain's most publicized events. The robbers were painted as both villains and folk heroes. The newspapers called them gentlemen thieves, fascinated by the fact that they used no guns and no violence. The public secretly admired their courage and cleverness, even as the authorities sought harsh justice. Several of the gang, including Bruce Reynolds and Ronald Biggs, received sentences of up to 30 years. But the legend didn't end there. Ronald Biggs escaped from prison in 1965 by scaling the wall and fleeing to Brazil, where he lived freely for decades, giving interviews and even becoming a minor celebrity. To the world, he represented the idea of the man who outsmarted the system, the thief who refused to be caught. The Great Train Robbery became more than a heist. It became a cultural symbol. Books, films, and documentaries romanticized the crime as a battle of wit versus authority. Yet behind the headlines was a truth few understood. It was never just about money. For Bruce Reynolds, it was about perfection. He wanted to prove that an ordinary man could challenge the system and win. Though many of the robbers were eventually caught, their legacy lived on. Every major heist that came after borrowed lessons from that night: discipline, precision, timing, and silence. It marked the moment when criminals became strategists, when robbery became an art form. The Great Train Robbery remains proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon in crime isn't a gun. It's intelligence, teamwork, and the courage to take the risk of a lifetime. By the dawn of the 21st century, crime had evolved beyond masks and guns. The new generation of thieves didn't need dynamite or drills. They needed laptops, code, and precision. The battlefield had shifted from banks and trains to cyberspace, where a single keystroke could move millions. But even in this digital age, old-school criminals still found ways to prove that skill and patience could outsmart technology itself. One of the most shocking examples came in 2016, the Bangladesh Central Bank cyber heist. It began with a few harmless emails, but hidden inside was a sophisticated piece of malware. The hackers quietly infiltrated the bank's system for weeks, studying its networks, passwords, and transfer patterns. Then, in a single night, they attempted to move $1 billion through the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Their digital footprints were nearly invisible. They succeeded in transferring $81 million to accounts in the Philippines before the system detected something was wrong. The world was stunned. There were no masks, no gunfire, no fingerprints, only code and intelligence. Law enforcement realized that crime had entered a new era where the enemy could be sitting halfway across the planet, hidden behind a screen. The heist proved that the new underworld no longer relied on brute strength, but on cyber mastery. But while technology dominated headlines, another crew of criminals in London reminded the world that the old ways still worked. In 2015, during the Easter holiday weekend, a group of elderly men, most in their 60s and 70s, pulled off one of Britain's biggest jewelry thefts, the Hatton Garden heist. The mastermind, Brian Reeder, was 76 years old. His crew, made up of retired thieves, used old-fashioned tools, drills, and patience to tunnel into a vault beneath one of London's most secure jewelry districts. They spent days underground, drilling through 2 feet of reinforced concrete to reach the safety deposit boxes. When the vault door finally opened, they were greeted with millions in gold, diamonds, and cash. The total value exceeded £14 million. These men weren't young, but they were professionals, experienced, calm, and efficient. They believed time was on their side, but it wasn't. Their mistake came after the job. Instead of disappearing, they celebrated. They made small purchases, bragged among friends, and used their own cars. Surveillance cameras and phone records eventually exposed them. The police, shocked to discover the thieves were pensioners, called them the bad grandpas of crime. Both heists, one digital and one physical, revealed an uncomfortable truth. The form of crime changes, but the mindset never does. Whether through computers or crowbars, the essence of a heist remains the same: control, precision, and trust. Inside every great heist crew, trust is everything. But it is also the first thing to break. In both the Cyber and Hatton Garden cases, betrayal and arrogance brought the criminals down. A single mistake, a careless conversation, or a trace of evidence can destroy even the most perfect operation. As technology advances, so does the cat-and-mouse game between law enforcement and the underworld. Cameras, sensors, and artificial intelligence now watch every street, yet the smartest minds continue to find loopholes. Whether it's a hacker sitting behind a glowing monitor or an old thief tunneling under a city street, both are driven by the same obsession: to outsmart the system, to do what others call impossible. In the end, the modern era of high-tech heists proved that crime doesn't vanish with time, it evolves. The tools may change, but the thrill of the perfect score remains timeless. Every great heist leaves behind 2 things: a fortune and a story that refuses to die. The masterminds vanish, the money disappears, but the legend always remains. From the tunnels of London to the vaults of Antwerp and the wires of cyberspace, the legacy of these daring crimes still shapes both the criminal world and law enforcement today. To investigators, every major heist became a lesson written in loss, a manual on what not to underestimate. They learned that the smartest criminals were not impulsive. They were engineers, hackers, planners, and even psychologists who studied human behavior better than most detectives. To the underworld, these heists became textbooks, guides for how to think, how to plan, and how to survive. For the next generation of thieves, the stories of Leonardo Notarbartolo, Bruce Reynolds, and Brian Reeder weren't cautionary tales. They were inspiration. The myth of the perfect crime still lingers, and perhaps that's what makes these stories immortal. There's something irresistible about watching a small group of people outsmart a system built by nations to challenge the unbeatable and succeed, even if only for a moment. For many of these criminals, the money was secondary. What mattered more was proof proof that human intelligence could overcome any wall, any code, any guard. But every empire built on crime eventually collapses. History shows that arrogance is the heist mastermind's greatest weakness. The same intelligence that plans a flawless operation often believes it can cheat time and fate too. Yet every thief eventually makes one mistake: a fingerprint, a phone call, a trace of pride that brings it all crashing down. Law enforcement too evolved because of them. Today, specialized international units work across borders, using artificial intelligence, cyber forensics, and data analytics to hunt criminals who think they are invisible. Vaults now have biometric scanners, silent alarms, and thermal sensors that can detect the smallest change in air pressure. The modern world was forced to become smarter because of the few who tried to break it. Still, the fascination never fades. Hollywood turned their crimes into blockbusters. Books immortalized their tactics. Documentaries tried to decode their minds. But beyond the glamour lies the darker truth. For every successful heist, dozens ended in disaster, betrayal, and death. The perfect crime might exist in theory, but in reality, perfection always costs too much. And yet, in the deep corners of the criminal underworld, there are still whispers of new plans. Silent geniuses who believe they can finish what their predecessors started. They watch, they learn, and they wait. Technology may close one door, but human creativity always finds another. In the end, the world's most daring heists aren't just about the money stolen. They're about the brilliance, arrogance, and desperation that drive people to risk everything for one impossible dream: the idea of total victory over the system. Time catches everyone. Fortunes fade, prisons fill, and memories erode. But the legend of the perfect heist, the flawless escape, the man who beat the unbreakable vault, that will never die. Because deep down, the world will always be drawn to those who dared to do the impossible, even if it cost them everything.